Hello everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. Before I start this video, let me do the obligatory little bit of advertising for my book, The Ecstatic Soul, the deepest investigation into the INFJ type ever done. All the links are available in the description box below. For most countries, you can get it for less than $10, ebook version, paperback version. The INFJ is seen from the inside rather than the outside. And look at this cover. Look at this beautiful make. I say you give it a chance, guys. Not least because it supports me. Okay, so today I'm going to make a video on a slightly different topic than the obvious one. The obvious one being the INFJ type, because I think that for the last month and a half, I've been almost exclusively doing INFJ topics. And occasionally, like broader sort of personality theory topics, but it's important to be able to broaden our horizons a little bit, and I felt that today could be an opportunity to discuss the ENFP type. It's been a long time since I've discussed the ENFP type specifically. I believe it's been a couple of years. Believe it or not, I don't know how I've been able to, keep them out of my mind for so long. I mean, I have not. I've just been repressing it for whatever reason. Perhaps a bad experience with an ENFP. In any case, in this video, I wanted to discuss 3 traits of ENFPs that are not often appreciated and considered. And I will begin without further ado. So the first trait that I want to discuss about ENFPs is that ENFPs are logical, or rather, ENFPs are rational. They're rational people. And let me again specify that rational actually suits much better than logical. But often ENFPs are seen as airy fairies who have lots of ideas but are not particularly rational, dominated by their emotions or a particular attraction of the moment, something that they perceive. But irrationality is not something that you would be quick to ascribe to an ENFP type. And I think that this is quite inaccurate and based on a misunderstanding primarily of the FI function, the function of introverted feeling, which is quite developed in ENFPs. And Carl Jung himself is quite obvious, quite clear, quite adamant that introverted feeling, just like extroverted feeling, are just as rational functions as the functions of extroverted thinking and introverted thinking, TI and TE. And the reason why he said that, the reason why Jung said that, is simply that you can think of introverted feeling in the case of the ENFP as a function that is very attuned to individual values, and more specifically, attuned to the linking of a particular mode of perception to a particular mode of action. So via perception, judgment, and action, the linking of those through an internal checking against the validity of the values that are held. In other words, ENFPs are value rational. If you think about values, you may think that you have certain values. Everybody has values. What you may not realize is that when you start thinking about your values and you start thinking about what other people have as values, you start noticing that values are not unlimited. Actually, values are universal. What distinguishes cultures is not that they have different fundamental values, is that the hierarchy of priority of the values tends to differ. And this is obviously manifested at a lower level in terms of different belief systems and different systems of actions and government and administration and so on. But values are universal things. And what this means is that there is always a universal value guiding a particular mode of belief and action. And that it is important to be value rational. That means to behave in such a way that you're not disrespecting and dismissing the value that you hold. Someone who's a purely logical thinker and who does not have this awareness of values is going to feel like they're rational in the sense that they move from means to ends according to a predetermined planned method. Seems very rational. But if they've lost awareness of value, they're not being value rational, and hence, in some sense, they're being less value rational than FI users. That includes the ENFP, and so as such, the ENFP has a claim to rationality that is just as strong as any good old T user. Secondly, ENFPs are ambiverts. And by this I mean that really ENFPs strike me as the least extroverted of the extroverts, with a possible exception of the ENTP, and that's for a simple reason, is that ENFPs are extroverted intuitives, they're any dominant, and that any is quite an interesting extroverted function because of all the extroverted functions. it is the one which in a sense is least expressive of what we would today consider in our contemporary society an extroverted behavior. Because extroverted behavior, when you think about it, when we reflect on what extroverted behavior means, I think in some sense extroverted behavior is seen nowadays through the lens of engaging with other people, being a very social person. An extrovert is someone who spends a lot of time with other people. Now, in fact, the people-oriented function par excellence, to use a well-known French phrase, is extroverted judgment in the form of feeling. So extroverted feeling is the social function par excellence. It's not extroverted intuition, because extroverted intuition is actually a function of perception, which means that extroverted intuition is an extroverted function, but because it is a function of perception, it has to submit to, first of all, an input from the external world. If you want to perceive something, the world has to provide the information that you then process into an actual percept, which will then be analyzed into a judgment. And at this point, the functions of judgments enter into the picture. But the thing about perception is that even when it is extroverted, it is still reactive in a sense. It is still waiting for the world to give it an input. And that makes it look a little bit like an introverted function. This sense of reacting, this sense of receiving an input is not the forward, pushing outward kind of extroversion that you see in extroverted and dominant extroverted judgment, for instance. And as such, an ENFP, you will often notice, and it's the same for ENTPs, yes, by definition, they're extroverts, so they are projected toward the object rather than the reverse. But the object is not a person. The object is a piece of information in the environment. That piece of information could be provided by a person, which is why ENFPs can seek out people for that reason. But it can be supplied by any other thing. It can be supplied by their room. It can be supplied by the world outside. It can be supplied by a book. As long as there is an object outside or a collection of objects to be apprehended and to be engaged with so as to create the typical products of lateral thinking, ENFPs will be happy, and that could include, being on your own, which is why a lot of ENFPs are actually not particularly more social than, say, ISFJs or INFJs. And lastly, I want to emphasize that ENFPs are profound, ENFPs are deep, maybe more so than they are given credit for, because, if you are a little bit into typology, there's something that you may have noticed, and it is that, sure, N-types tend to have this probably unjustified reputation as being more profound than sensors. I say unjustified because it all depends on the semantic meaning that you associate with the word depth. But let's assume that we have this sense of depth as questioning things and as going deep in this metaphorical sense. Then we might say intuitives are deeper than sensors on average. But there's this other preconception, and that other preconception is that introverted intuitives, dominant introverted intuitives, go deep in an intensive sense. So it's like a tunnel vision, or you could imagine they have a spade and they dig, and in a single move, they dig out a lot of earth, and they only need a few movements to get really deep. And there's this sense that ENFPs and ENTPs, they just they have a spade, but they just they go all around the garden and it's just dig out a little bit here, a little bit there, so that their capacity for depth is exhausted in getting too distracted from the one hole and digging all sorts of different holes. And so there's this idea that the creativity of the ENFP and the ENTP is extensive rather than intensive, that they are able to broaden the horizon rather than go deep within a single line of the horizon. And I mean, there is a sense in which this is true, but it's not necessarily true. If you look at the work of someone like Jacques Derrida, for example, the philosopher, I mean, he's an incredibly profound philosopher. He's complete anti-dominance, because fundamentally, anti-dominance is an ability to question everything, but questioning everything means even questioning questions. It is a perfect tool to go as deep as you can. The main obstacle is that ENFPs and ENTPs, as they're going deep, they're going to end up questioning their own presuppositions that led them to question and dig deep in the first place. So when they stop digging, it's not always they get distracted. Sometimes it's that they are questioning the depth that they had believed in the first place. And that itself is a form of depth, even though it's not necessarily as visible as NI depth. Thank you guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Let me drop a comment and subscribe. Bye bye.